So yeah, welcome everyone to another Rise and Tide Foundation weekly reading group where we're beginning a new reading of a Plato dialogue after we've been through a journey into the mind of Leibniz over the course of many weeks. Before that, it was working through some essential writings of Max Planck. And before that, we had several sessions working through the works of Lyndon LaRouche's prison writings. So it's been an interesting exploration. Today, I asked Jerry to say a few opening remarks and find the best translation that he could, which he was nice enough to do. And that link to what we're going to read today, the Plato's Phaedo, will be in the description box of this video for anyone watching right now on YouTube. Jerry, it's all yours.
Okay, I just wanted to say a few words before we start. So earlier, after we had read Max Planck's Philosophy of Physics, then we read Leibniz's Discourse on Metaphysics. And reading the Leibniz really gave us a good idea of where Planck's ideas were coming from and how they were rooted in Leibniz. So while we were reading Leibniz, I was thinking that maybe we could do the same thing and see where Leibniz was coming from. So when we were reading the Discourse, we read part 20, and Leibniz said, a noteworthy disquisition in Plato's Phaedo against the philosophers who were too materialistic. So that seemed like a good idea to me, so I suggested to Matt that next we could read Plato's Phaedo dialogue, and that way see where Leibniz is coming from. So I don't know how much of Plato's dialogues people have read, but it's a good one to start. Now, I just wanted to give a little historical connection between Leibniz and Plato's Phaedo dialogue, which involves a man named Moses Mendelssohn. I don't know if everyone knows him, but you'll hear about him. So after Leibniz's death, there was a real witch hunt launched against him. Well, actually, it was started before that, and we saw that in the paper we read by Michael Kirsch, Venice versus Leibniz, where Newton tried to claim that the invention of the calculus was plagiarized from him by Leibniz. So anyway, after Leibniz died, all his papers were seized, and no one was even allowed to attend his funeral, and he was buried in an unmarked grave. So later, Voltaire and Maupertuis were sent to Paris to try to undermine Leibniz's influence in France and to promote Newton. And later, they tried to do the same thing in the Berlin Academy. And that was the one that Leibniz had helped set up. A defense of Leibniz against this attack at the Berlin Academy was started by a young professor named Abraham Kessner. The interesting thing about Kessner, when Dr. Benjamin Franklin was in London, for the summer sometimes he would take trips. So one year, 1766, he traveled to Germany. And who did he meet? Abraham Kessner. So it just shows you the connection. It's not accidental. Now, one of Kessner's students was a man named Gotthold Lessing. And Lessing moved to Berlin, and he became good friends and collaborator with Moses Mendelssohn in their joint defense of Leibniz. Then later, Mendelssohn would study Greek, study Homer, and study Plato, and he did the translation of Plato's Phaedo dialogue, the one we're going to read tonight, and he did it from a Leibnizian standpoint. This was published in 1767, the year after Franklin visited Germany. Now, also, this is interesting, that same year, 1767, after 20 years of attacks against Leibniz at that Berlin Academy of Science that Leibniz had founded. The Academy decided they were going to give award for the best eulogy of Leibniz. So they had this contest that year. The winner was this guy named John Sylvain Bailly, who would later become the first president of the French National Assembly, you know, where they had the tennis court oath, and also he became a mayor of Paris. So again, it's not coincidental. So now, one particular response to Mendelssohn's publication of his Phaedo is especially important. After he published it, an 82-year-old mathematician and astronomer named Raphael Levy, he began a correspondence with Mendelssohn. And it turned out that Levy had, as a young man, been Leibniz's pupil and his secretary, and he lived for 6 years in Leibniz's household. He was the only person who was at Leibniz's funeral in 1716. And through him, they were able to discover the exact location of Leibniz's grave 50 years later. So that's the historical connection between Leibniz and Plato through Mendelssohn. So, okay, back to Leibniz's discourse. So in the discourse, Leibniz was talking about the idea of the immortality of the soul. And that's an idea that's also discussed by Plato. He first discusses it at the end of the Republic dialogue, at the end of Book 10, and also in the Phaedo. And in the Phaedo, this is where Socrates dies. So it's like the last dialogue. Now, who was Phaedo? Well, I'm just quoting from this book, Diogenes Laertius. He says, Phaedo, from the Elean, he was taken prisoner at the time of the subjugation of his country and was compelled to submit to the vilest treatment as a slave. So he became a slave in Athens. So one day while he was standing in the street, he was met with Socrates, who asked Crito to ransom him. So Phaedo became free, and after that time he studied philosophy with Socrates as became a free man. So you can see Phaedo's attachment to Socrates. Now, the Phaedo is one of the dialogues that Plato draws attention to because although it occurs at an earlier time, it's recalled from a later time, like a reminiscence. It's sort of like two guys are walking down the street and one says, hey, remember that time when Plato, where Socrates said this about that? And the other guy says, yeah. And then the dialogue of Socrates is retold. So it's actually at a time after Socrates has died, but they're discussing it from a time when he was alive. Now, Plato only does this from what I can tell, in 4 dialogues: the Symposium, the Theaetetus, the Parmenides, and the Phaedo. So I would say it's an important dialogue from Plato's standpoint that he's emphasizing these 4. Now, this idea of the immortality of the soul, this has erupted so much controversy and so much debate over the years. You can look at it from Newton versus Leibniz, their fight over this, Aristotle versus Plato, that fight. It even goes back to Egypt versus Babylonia. So it's a very cutting idea. So there's this question: can immortality be proven? Well, can mortality be proven? It's the same thing. So I I don't want to say too much about this idea because I think we should just read it and discuss it and see what we think. Also, because I'm using some of it in an upcoming presentation that I'm doing, and I want to save some of it for them. So I think we should just have fun reading this. It's a very good dialogue, and for some people it'll be an introduction. For some of us, we're rereading, and every time you read a Plato dialogue, you read something new, and there's new ideas. You go, I don't remember reading that. So we should just have fun reading this. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jerry. By the way, Jerry, do you want to host the screen share, or do you want me to do it and we'll just scroll down on my side?
You can do it because I'm having some problems with my computer.
Okay,
So.
not a problem. All right. There we are. Does everyone see the dialogue?
Yep. You can make it a little bigger.
I can do that. I can certainly do that. Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. So we have a few characters to start with in the future, the past that was the future. Thinking about a deeper past that was also a future at one point. So we have, these names, eh? Jerry, how do you pronounce that first name?
I'm
Echecrates?
not sure. I've seen it. Echecrates, I think. I've
All
seen
right.
it pronounced with an X, Execrates, but I think Echecrates, Phaedo, and it's only like this for a little bit, and then it's just one person talking. So
Well, yeah, but I think even after when it's one person talking, then we'll find ourselves snapping into a dialogue process anyway. It'll fade into that. So let's start with who wants to be Echecrates?
I can
Eureka,
do
you want
that.
to? Oh, you wanted to be it? Okay, Jerry, you're
Yeah.
Echecrates. Who's going to be Phaedo?
I could be Phaedo.
All right, and Jerry. Oh no, you're Echecrates. Luke, you want to be Socrates when the time comes?
Sure.
Okay, and then I'll be like, I don't know. We'll see what's needed, and Eureka will also jump on board. Okay, so let's just start.
Okay. Were you with Socrates yourself, Phaedo, on the day when he drank the poison in prison? Or did you hear about it from someone else?
I was there myself at Echecrates.
Then what did he say before his death? And how did he die? I should like to hear, for nowadays none of the Phliasians go to Athens at all, and no stranger has come from there for a long time who could tell us anything definite about this matter, except that he drank poison and died. So we could learn no further details.
Did you not even hear about the trial and how it was conducted?
Yes, someone told us about that, and we wondered that, although it took place a long time ago, he was put to death much later. Now, why was that, Phaedo?
It was a matter of chance at Echecrates. It happened that the stern of the ship which the Athenians sent to Delos, was crowned on the day before the trial.
What ship is this?
This is the ship, as the Athenians say, in which Theseus once went to Crete with the 14 youths and maidens and saved them and himself. Now the Athenians made a vow to Apollo, as the story goes, that if they were saved, they would send a mission every year to Delos. And from that time, even to the present day, they send it annually in honor of the god. Now it is their law that after the mission begins, the city must be pure. and no one may be publicly executed until the ship has gone to Delos and back. And sometimes, when contrary winds detain it, this takes a long time. The beginning of the mission is when the priest of Apollo crowns the stern of the ship, and this took place, as I say, on the day before the trial. For that reason, Socrates passed a long time in prison between his trial and his death.
What took place at his death, Phaedo? What was said and done? And which of his friends were with him? Or did the authorities forbid them to be present so that he died without his friends?
Not at all. Some were there, in fact, a good many.
Be so good as to tell us exactly as you can about all these things, if you are not too busy.
I am not busy, and I will try to tell you. It is always my greatest pleasure to be reminded of Socrates, whether by speaking of him myself or by listening to someone else.
Well, Phaedo, you will have hearers who feel as you do. So try to tell us everything as accurately as you can.
For my part, I had strange emotions when I was there, for I was not filled with pity as I might naturally be when present at the death of a friend, since he seemed to me to be happy, both in his bearing and his words. He was meeting death so fearlessly and nobly. And so I thought that even in going to the abode of the dead, he was not going without the protection of the gods, and that when he arrived there, it would be well with him, if it ever was well with anyone. And for this reason, I was not at all filled with pity, as might seem natural when I was present at a scene of mourning. Nor, on the other hand, did I feel pleasure because we were occupied with philosophy, as was our custom, and our talk was of philosophy. But a very strange feeling came over me, an unaccustomed mixture of pleasure and pain together, when I thought that Socrates was presently to die, and all of us who were there were in much the same condition, sometimes laughing and sometimes weeping, especially one of us, Apollodorus. You know him and his character.
To be sure, I do.
He was quite unrestrained, and I was much agitated myself, as were the others.
Who were these, Phaedo?
Of native Athenians, there was this Apollodorus and Critobulus and his father, and Hermogenes and Epigenes and Aeschines and Antisthenes and uh, Ctesippus. The Paeanian was there too, and Menexenus, and some other Athenians. But Plato, I think, was ill.
Were any foreigners there?
Yes, Simmias of Thebes, and Cebes, and Phaedonides, and from Megara, Euclides, and Terpstion.
What? Were Aristippus and Cleombrotus there?
No, they were said to be in Aegina.
Was anyone else there?
I think these were about all.
Well then, what was the conversation?
I will try to tell you everything from the beginning. On the previous days, I and the others had always been in the habit of visiting Socrates. We used to meet at daybreak in the court where the trial took place, for it was near the prison. And every day we used to wait about, talking with each other until the prison was opened, for it was not opened early. And when it was opened, we went in to Socrates and passed most of the day with him. On that day, we came together earlier, for the day before, when we left the prison in the evening, we heard that the ship had arrived from Delos. So we agreed to come to the usual place as early in the morning as possible. And we came, and the jailer, who usually answered the door, came out and told us to wait and not go in until he told us. For, he said, the 11 are releasing Socrates from his fetters and giving directions how he is to die today. So after a little delay, he came and told us to go in. We went in then and found Socrates just released from his fetters and Xantippe, you know her, with his little son in her arms, sitting beside him. Now, when Xantippe saw us, she cried out and said the kind of thing that women always do say. Oh, Socrates, this is the last time now that your friends will speak to you or you to them. And Socrates glanced at Crito and said, Crito, let somebody take her home. And some of Crito's people took her away, wailing and beating her breast. But Socrates sat up on his couch and bent his leg and rubbed it with his hand. And while he was rubbing it, he said, what a strange thing, my friends, that seems to be which men call pleasure. How wonderful it is related to that which seems to be its opposite, pain, in that they will not both come to a man at the same time. And yet, if he pursues the one and captures it, he is generally obliged to take the other also, as if the two were joined together in one head. And I think, he said, if Aesop had thought of them, he would have made a fable telling how they were at war and God wished to reconcile them. And when he could not do that, he fastened their heads together. And for that reason, when one of them comes to anyone, the other follows after. Just so it seems that in my case, after pain was in my leg on account of the fetter, pleasure appears to have come following after. Here Cebes interrupted and said,
So why don't
by
we?
Zeus,
So wait,
what,
Pascal.
yeah, can we change?
Yeah. So you're gonna keep
Eventually?
doing the narratives where it's appropriate,
Okay,
and we'll have people break out into the individual, I think, personalities now. So we'll have Luke. He said he's gonna do Socrates. Eureka, do you want to do Cebes? Yeah. Okay. You can take yourself off mute. And when other personalities come in, and Pascal, if you only have like a word or two to say as a narrator, don't even say it. And if it's only when you have like a sentence, like you just did, that's when you can chime in and speak the narration.
all right.
Where are we at now?
Page 211. Here, Cebes interrupted and said, "Now it's Eureka."
So I start with by Zeus.
Yep.
By Zeus, Socrates. I am glad you reminded me. Several others have asked about the poems you have composed. The metrical versions of Aesop's fables and the hymn to Apollo. And the Evenus asked me the day before yesterday why you, who never wrote any poetry before, composed these verses after you came to prison. Now, if you care that I should be able to answer Evenus when he asks me again, and I know he will ask me, tell me what to say.
Socrates.
Then,
I say, tell him,
Oh yeah.
Cebes, the truth that I composed these verses not because I wished to rival him or his poems, for I knew that would not be easy, but because I wished to test the meaning of certain dreams and to make sure that I was neglecting no duty in case their repeated commands meant that I must cultivate the muses in this way. They were something like this. The same dream came to me often in my past life, sometimes in one form and sometimes in another, but always saying the same thing. Socrates, it said, make music and work at it. And I formerly thought it was urging and encouraging me to do what I was doing already, that just as people encourage runners by cheering, so the dream was encouraging me to do what I was doing, that is, to make music, because philosophy was the greatest music, the greatest kind of music, and I was working at that. But now, after the trial, while the festival of the god delayed my execution, I thought, in case the repeated dream really meant to tell me to make this, which is ordinarily called music, I ought to do so and not to disobey. For I thought it was safer not to go hands before making sure that I had done what I ought by obeying the dream and composing verses. So first I composed a hymn to the god whose festival it was. And after the god, considering that a poet, if he is really to be a poet, must compose myths and not speeches. Since I was not a maker of myths, I took the myths of Aesop, which I had at hand and knew, and turned into verse the first I came upon. So tell Evenus that, Cebes, and bid him farewell, and tell him, if he is wise, to come after me as quickly as he can. I, it seems, am going today, for that is the order of the Athenians.
So who wants to be Simmias? I can be Simmias. Okay. What a message that is, Socrates, for Evenus. I have met him often, and from what I have seen of him, I should say that he will not take your advice in the least if he can help it.
Who says that?
That's you.
Why so? Is not Evenus a philosopher?
I think so.
Then Evenus will take my advice, and so will every man who has any worthy interest in philosophy. Perhaps, however, he will not take his own life, for they say that is not permitted. And as he spoke,
That's Pascal.
Oh, and as he spoke, he put his feet down on the ground and remained sitting in this way through the rest of the conversation.
What? Cebes. Yeah.
what do you mean by this, Socrates? That it is not permitted to take one's life, but that the philosopher would desire to follow after the dying?
how is this, Cebes? Have you and Simmias, who are pupils of Philolaus, not heard about such things?
Nothing definite, Socrates.
I myself speak of them only from hearsay, but I have no objection to telling what I have heard, and indeed it is perhaps especially fitting as I am going to the other world to tell stories about the life there and consider what we think about it. For what else could one do in the time between now and sunset?
Keep it going, CVs.
Why in the world do they say that it is not permitted to kill oneself, Socrates? I heard Philolaus, when he was living in our city, say the same thing you just said. And I have heard it from others too, that one must not do this. But I never heard anyone say anything definite about it.
You must have courage, and perhaps you might hear something. But perhaps it will seem strange to you that this alone of all laws is without exception, and it never happens to mankind, as in other matters that only at some times, and for some persons, it is better to die than to live. And it will perhaps seem strange to you that these human beings, for whom it is better to die, cannot, without impiety, do good to themselves, but must wait for some other benefactor.
God knows it.
Okay, Pascal. For stuff like that in the future, though, you can read those.
Should I? Okay, I will.
I think the rule should be like 5 words or more.
1, 2, 3. Okay. And CB, smiling, gently said,
God knows it does. Speaking in.
Oh, that's Pascal.
Okay, that's
oh,
your.
speaking in his own dialect. Okay, sorry.
You have a dialect from what is it? I don't know what little city in Athens. Okay, I think that's Socrates now.
You help me find it again?
It would seem unreasonable if put in this way.
Oh, it would seem unreasonable if put in this way. But perhaps there is some reason in it. Now, the doctrine that is taught in secret about this matter, that we men are in a kind of prison and must not set ourselves free or run away, seems to me to be weighty and not easy to understand. But this, at least, CBs, I do believe is sound, that the gods are our guardians, and that we men are one of the chattels of the gods. Do you not believe this?
Yes, I do.
Well then, if one of your chattels should kill itself when you had not indicated that you wished to die, would you be angry with it and punish it if you could?
Certainly.
Then perhaps from this point of view, it is not unreasonable to say that a man must not kill himself until God sends some necessity upon him, such as has now come upon me.
That seems sensible. But what you said just now, Socrates, that philosophers ought to be ready and willing to die, that seems strange if we were right just now in saying that God is our guardian and we are his possessions. For it is not reasonable that the wisest men should not be troubled when they leave that service in which the gods, who are the best overseers in the world, are watching over them. A wise man certainly does not think that when he is free, he can take better care of himself than they do. A foolish man might perhaps think so, that he ought to run away from his master, and he would not consider that he must not run away from a good master, but ought to stay with him as long as possible. And so he might thoughtlessly run away, but a man of sense would wish to be always with one who is better than himself. And yet, Socrates, if we look at it in this way, the contrary of what we just said seems natural. For the wise ought to be troubled at dying, and the foolish to rejoice.
When Socrates heard this, I thought he was pleased by Cebes' earnestness, and glancing at us, he said,
Stevie is always on the track of arguments and will not be easily convinced by whatever anyone says.
and Simmias said,
Sorry, I'm trying to get the page. What page is it?
219.
219, yeah.
Okay, sorry, just give me 2 seconds here. I hit a button and it jumped 200 pages into the future. There we are. Okay. And Simmias said, well, Socrates, this time I think myself that Cebes is right. For why should really wise men run away from masters who are better than they and lightly separate themselves from them? And it strikes me that Cebes is aiming his argument at you, because you are so ready to leave us and the gods, who are, as you yourself agree, good rulers.
You have a right to say that, for I think you mean that I must defend myself against this accusation, as if we were in a law court.
Precisely.
Well, then, I will try to make a more convincing defense than I did before the judges. For if I did not believe that I was going to other wise and good gods, and moreover, to men who have died, better men than those here, I should be wrong in not grieving at death. But as it is, you may rest assured that I expect to go to good men, though I should not care to assert this positively. But I would assert as positively as anything about such matters that I'm going to gods who are good masters. And therefore, so far as that is concerned, I not only do not grieve, but I have great hopes that there is something in store for the dead, and as has been said of old, something better for the good than for the wicked.
Well, do you intend to go away, Socrates, and keep your opinions to yourself, or would you let us share it? It seems to me that this is a good which belongs in common to us, and at the same time, if you convince us by what you say, that will serve as your defense.
I will try. But first, let us ask Crito there what he wants. He has apparently been trying to say something for a long time.
Jerry?
Okay. Only, Socrates, that the man who is to administer the poison to you has been telling me for some time to warn you to talk as little as possible. He says people get warm when they talk, and heat has a bad effect on the action of the poison. So sometimes he has to make those who talk too much drink twice or even 3 times.
Never mind him. Just let him do his part and prepare to give it twice or even, if necessary, 3 times.
I was pretty sure that was what you would say, but he has been bothering me for a long time.
Never mind him. I wish now to explain to you, my judges, the reason why I think a man who has really spent his life in philosophy is naturally of good courage when he is to die, and has strong hopes that when he is dead, he will attain the greatest blessings in that other land. So I will try to tell you, Simmias and Cebes, how this would be. I continue?
I think
Other
so.
people are likely not to be aware that those who pursue philosophy a right study Nothing but our right study nothing but dying and being dead. Now, if this is true, it would be absurd to be eager for nothing, but this all their lives, and then to be troubled when that came for which they had all along been eagerly practicing.
By
Simius
Zeus,
laughed.
please. I don't feel much like laughing just now, but you made me laugh. For I think the multitude, if they heard what you just said about the philosophers, would say that you were quite right. And our people at home would agree entirely with you that philosophers desire death. And they would add that they know very well that the philosophers deserve it.
And they would be speaking the truth, Simius, except in the matter of knowing very well. For they do not know in what way the real philosophers desire death, nor in what way they deserve death, nor what kind of a death it is. Let us then speak with one another, paying no further attention to them. Do you think there is such a thing as death?
Certainly.
We believe, do we not, that death is the separation of the soul from the body, and that the state of being dead is the state in which the body is separated from the soul and exists alone by itself, and the soul is separated from the body and exists alone by itself? Is death anything other than this?
No, it is this.
Now, my friend, see if you agree with me. For if you do, I think we shall get more light on our subject. Do you think a philosopher would be likely to care much about the so-called pleasures, such as eating and drinking?
By no means, Socrates.
How about the pleasures of love?
Certainly not.
Well, do you think such a man would think much of the other cares of the body? I mean, such as the possession of fine clothes and shoes and the other personal adornments? Do you think he would care about them or despise them, except so far as it is necessary to have them?
I think the true philosopher would despise them.
Altogether, then, you think that such a man would not devote himself to the body, but would, so far as he was able, turn away from the body and concern himself with the soul.
Yes.
To begin with, then, it is clear that in such matters the philosopher, more than other men, separates the soul from communion with the body.
It is.
Now, certainly, most people think that a man who takes no pleasure and has no part in such things doesn't deserve to live, and that one who cares nothing for the pleasures of the body is about as good as dead.
That is very true.
Now, how about the acquirement of pure knowledge? Is the body a hindrance or not? If it is made to share in the search for wisdom, what I mean is this: have the sight and hearing of men any truth in them? Or is it true, as the poets are always telling us, that we neither hear nor see anything accurately? And yet, if these two physical senses are not accurate or exact, the rest are not likely to be, for they are inferior to these. Do you not think so?
Certainly I do.
Then, when does the soul attain to truth? For when it tries to consider anything in company with the body, it is evidently deceived by it.
True.
In thought, then, if at all, something of the realities becomes clear to it.
Yes.
But it thinks best when none of these things troubles it, neither hearing nor sight, nor pain, nor any pleasure, but it is so far as possible alone by itself, and takes leave of the body, and avoiding, so far as it can, all association or contact with the body, reaches out toward the reality.
That is true.
In this matter also, then, the soul of the philosopher greatly despises the body and avoids it, and strives to be alone by itself.
Evidently.
Now, how about such things as this, Simmias? Do we think there is a thing as absolute justice or not?
I certainly think there is.
And absolute beauty and goodness?
Of course.
Well, did you ever see anything of that kind with your eyes?
Certainly not.
Or did you ever reach them with any of the bodily senses? I speak of all such things as size, health, strength, and in short, the essence or underlying quality of everything. Is their true nature contemplated by means of the body? Is it not rather the case that he who prepares himself most carefully to understand the true essence of each thing that he examines would come nearest to the knowledge of it?
Certainly.
Would not the man that do this most perfectly, who approaches each thing so far as possible with the reason alone, not introducing sight into his reasoning, nor dragging in any of the other senses along with his thinking, but who employs pure absolute reason in his attempt to search out the pure absolute essence of things, and who removes himself so far as possible from eyes and ears, and in a word, from his whole body, because he feels that its companionship disturbs the soul and hinders it from attaining truth and wisdom? Is not this the man, Simmias, if anyone, to attain to the knowledge of reality?
That is true as true can be, Socrates.
Then all this must cause good lovers of wisdom to think and say one to the other something like this: there seems to be a shortcut which leads us and our arguments to the conclusion in our search that so long as we have the body and the soul is contaminated by such an evil, we shall never attain completely what we desire, that is, the truth. For the body keeps us constantly busy by reason of its need of sustenance, and moreover, if diseases came upon it, they hinder our pursuit of the truth. And the body fills us with passions and desires and fears and all sorts of fancies and foolishness, so that, as they say, it really and truly makes it impossible for us to think at all. The body and its desires are the only cause of wars and factions and battles, for all wars arise for the sake of gaining money, and we are compelled to gain money for the sake of the body. We are slaves to its service. And so, because of all these things, we have no leisure for philosophy. But the worst of all is that if we do get a bit of leisure and turn to philosophy, the body is constantly breaking in upon our studies and disturbing us with noise and confusion, so that it prevents our beholding the truth. And in fact, we perceive that if we are ever to know anything absolutely, we must be free from the body and must behold the actual realities with the eye of the soul alone. And then, as our argument shows, when we are dead, we are likely to possess the wisdom which we desire and claim to be enamored of, but not while we live. For if pure knowledge is impossible while the body is with us, one of two things must follow. Either it cannot be acquired at all, or only when we are dead. For then the soul will be by itself, apart from the body, but not before. And while we live, we shall, I think, be nearest to knowledge when we avoid, so far as possible, intercourse and communion with the body, except what is absolutely necessary and are not filled with its nature, but keep ourselves pure from it until God himself sets us free. And in this way, freeing ourselves from the foolishness of the body and being pure, we shall, I think, be with the pure and shall know of ourselves all that is pure, and that is perhaps the truth. For it cannot be that the impure attain the pure. Such words as these, I think, Simmias, all who are rightly lovers of knowledge must say to each other, and such must be their thoughts. Do you not agree?
Most assuredly, Socrates.
Then, if this is true, my friend, I have great hopes that when I reach the place to which I am going, I shall there, if anywhere, attain fully to that which has been my chief object in my past life, so that the journey which is now imposed upon me is begun with good hope. And the like hope exists for every man who thinks that his mind has been purified and made ready.
Certainly.
And does not the purification consist in this which has been mentioned long ago in our discourse, in separating, so far as possible, the soul from the body and teaching the soul the habit of collecting and bringing itself together from all parts of the body and living, so far as it can, both now and hereafter, alone by itself, freed from the body as from fetters?
Certainly.
Well, then, that is what we call death, is it not? A release and separation from the body?
Exactly so.
But as we hold, the true philosophers and they alone are always most eager to release the soul. And just this, the release and separation of the soul from the body, is their study, is it not?
Obviously.
Then, as I said in the beginning, it would be absurd if a man who had been all his life fitting himself to live as nearly in a state of death as he could should then be disturbed when death came to him. Would it not be absurd?
Of course. Hey, Jared, by the way, if you want to stop
In fact,
time and dwell on anything, you just decide. You're guiding it.
Okay.
So yeah, of course.
in fact, then, Simmias, the true philosophers practice dying, and death is less terrible to them than to any other men. Consider it in this way. They are in every way hostile to the body, and they desire to have the soul apart by itself alone. Would it not be very foolish if they should be frightened and troubled when this very thing happens, and if they should not be glad to go to the place where there is hope of attaining what they longed for all through life, and they longed for wisdom and of escaping from the companionship of that which they hated? When human loves or wives or sons have died, many men have willingly gone to the other world, led by the hope of seeing there those whom they longed for, and of being with them. And shall he, who is really in love with wisdom, and has a firm belief that he can find it nowhere else than in the other world, grieve when he dies and not be glad to go there? We cannot think that, my friend, if he is really a philosopher, for he will confidently believe that he will find pure wisdom nowhere else than in the other world. And if this is so, would it not be very foolish for such a man to fear death?
Very foolish, certainly.
Then is it not a sufficient indication when you see a man troubled because he's going to die, that he was not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body? And this same man is also a lover of money and of honor, one or both.
Certainly, it is as you say.
Then it is not that which is called courage, especially characteristic of philosophers,
By all means.
and self-restraint. That which is commonly called self-restraint, with which consists in not being excited by the passions and in being superior to them and acting in a seemly way, is not that characteristic of those alone who despise the body and pass their lives in philosophy?
Necessarily.
For if you care to consider the courage and the self restraint of other men, you will see that they are absurd.
How so, Socrates?
You know, do you not, that all other men count death among the great evils?
They certainly do.
And do not brave men face death when they do face it through fear of greater evils?
That is true.
Then all philosophers are brave through fear.
All except philosophers.
All except philosophers are brave through fear, and yet it is absurd to be brave through fear and cowardice.
Very true.
And how about those of seemly conduct? Is their case not the same? They are self-restrained because of a kind of self-indulgence. We say to be sure that this is impossible. Nevertheless, their foolish self-restraint amounts to little more than this, for they fear that they may be deprived of certain pleasures which they desire, and so they refrain from some because they are under the sway of others. And yet, being ruled by pleasures is called self-indulgence. Nevertheless, they conquer pleasures because they are conquered by other pleasures. Now, this is about what I said just now, that they are self-restrained by a kind of self-indulgence.
So it seems.
My dear Simios, I suspect that this is not the right way to purchase virtue, by exchanging pleasures for pleasures, and pains for pains, and fear for fear, and greater for less, as if they were coins, but the only right coinage for which all those things must be exchanged, and by means of and with which all these things are to be bought and sold, is in fact wisdom and courage and self-restraint and justice, and in short, true virtue exist only with wisdom, whether pleasures and fears and other things of that sort are added or taken away. And virtue, which consists in the exchange of such things for each other without wisdom, is but a painted imitation of virtue, and is really slavish and has nothing healthy or true in it. But truth is, in its fact, a purification from all these things, and self-restraint and justice and courage and wisdom itself are a kind of purification. And I fancy that those men who established the mysteries were not unenlightened, but in reality had a hidden meaning when they said long ago that whoever goes uninitiated and unsanctified to the other world will lie in the mire. But he who arrives there initiated and purified will dwell with the gods. For as they say in the mysteries, the thyrsus bearers are many, but the mystics few. And these mystics are, I believe, those who have been true philosophers. And I, in my life, have, so far as I could, left nothing undone, and have striven in every way to make myself one of them. But whether I have striven aright and have met with success, I believe I shall know clearly when I have arrived there, very soon, if it is God's will. This then, Simmias and Cebes, is the defense I offer to show that it is reasonable for me not to be grieved or troubled at leaving you and the rulers I have here, because I believe that there, no less than here, I shall find good rulers and friends. If now I am more successful in convincing you by my defense than I was in my convincing my Athenian judges, it is well.
When Socrates had finished, Cebes answered and said,
Eureka, you're on mute.
Socrates, I agree to the other things you say, but in regard to the soul, men are very prone to disbelief. They fear that when the soul leaves the body, it no longer exists anywhere, and that on the day when the man dies, it is destroyed and perishes. And when it leaves the body, it departs from it straight away, it flies away and is no longer anywhere, scattered like a breath or smoke. If it exists anywhere by itself as a unit, freed from these evils which you have enumerated just now, there would be good reason for the blessed hope, Socrates, that what you say is true. But perhaps no little argument and proof is required to show that when a man is dead, the soul still exists and has any power and intelligence.
What you say, Cebes, is true. Now, what shall we do? Do you wish to keep on conversing about this to see whether it is probable or not?
I do. I should like to hear what you think about it.
Well, I do not believe anyone who heard us now, even if he were a comic poet, would say that I am chattering and talking about things which do not concern me. So if you like, let us examine the matter to the end. Let us consider it by asking whether the souls of men who have died are in the netherworld or not. There is an ancient tradition which we remember that they go there from here and come back here again and are born from the dead. Now, if this is true, if the living are born again from the dead, our souls would exist there, would they not? For they could not be born again if they did not exist, and this would be a sufficient proof that they exist. And if it should really be made evident that the living are born only from the dead, but if this is not so, then some other argument would be needed.
I wanted to point out something.
Yeah, please.
I thought it was very funny from Plato to actually say, well, to put in Socrates' speech that like the comic poet. You see when he starts with, well, I do not believe anyone who heard us now, even if you were a comic poet, would say that I am chattering and talking about things which do not concern me. I think he's attacking Aristophanes, who had written a play and he was making fun of Socrates. Do you agree, Jerry?
Yeah, I think you're right. Pascal.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Mhm.
A good job.
Yeah, I think it's worth keeping in mind that the way, and this is for anybody listening online, the way that Plato is structuring all his dialogues, but you see it really clearly here, is as a series of hypotheses that attempt to resolve a problem, which are then tested through reason. And we already have like one hypothesis that was troublesome, right? That was built on a response to a perplexing paradox. Do you guys remember how the first hypothesis was tested out and came to a resolution? but that resolution created another problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
the idea, if I remember well, you want us to elaborate on that, or
maybe do like a quick recap, just in our own words, just so that we're all on the same page as Plato is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at first, when Phaedo was talking, was just explaining how the days were going by and when they were going to see Socrates at the prison.
Yeah.
And so he had all of his friends around him, and like his wife was screaming, and she had to be taken away, but Socrates was not really like in any kind of really emotional state, so he was just waiting to die, and he knew he was going to die, and people were asking him, well, how could you be so happy to go, as you're going to depart us, and what's going to happen, like usually people are afraid of dying. Why aren't you afraid of dying? And that's how the first part kind of got on track. But
yeah, exactly.
somebody else, if you want to continue on that.
Yeah.
So
Go on. Yeah, if you remember what how did he cause them a perplexion, how did he make them perplexed or confused that started this conversation going?
Well, the first part was about, he talked about pain and pleasure and how the body acts and reacts and how both come together. And then he went into this question of what is a real philosopher? Is he really concerned about the body? And it's a famous saying of Socrates that people bring up a lot in eulogies or whatnot, that like if you're a true philosopher, you're just training yourself to die. You're just longing to die. Like that's your end. You're following a course that is going to lead you there. So this is not problematic. You're just living, trying to exercise, I guess, all your free will to learn how you're going to die one day. And so format your life because you know what the end goal is. So that's one part. But then also this idea of laws, and if it's true that there's a world beyond the material one, then it's also ruled by good laws and the gods. And you also see all of your departed friends, those who died before you. You go and you meet them. So it's not really like Socrates says, I'm not really anxious since I'm going to see people that I like, I love. So I'm not, this is going to be great.
Mm-hmm. Which is also part of the response of why you shouldn't kill yourself too, right? Because he's like, well, if we should all be preparing as philosophers to die, then are you saying that we should be killing ourselves or something? But that's wrong. So why would we not want to kill ourselves in that case too? And he's like, well, because the gods actually, it's like the best masters. Like if you gave your servant, if your servant went and ran off or whatever without your permission, you would be angry. But you're a human, you're mortal. The gods are like ultimately wise and the best masters. So it's like, why would you disobey? They gave you life. Why would you take away your own life that they gave you? That doesn't seem very pious or good, except if there's a higher necessity for one dying, which I think that's Plato's situation or Socrates' situation right now. Is he's suffering the effects of a legal decision from the demos to die, and he chose in the previous dialogue before this one, the Credo, that it was the best course of action to suffer the consequences of what the people had judged for him to drink the poison. But why is it that the soul? Why is death ultimately something that the philosopher is pursuing? Do you remember like what the logic was behind that, guys?
Oh, this the soul thinks clearer, more clearly, without being hindered by the body's whims and fetters and.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, because if we're pursuing truth, then when have you ever seen truth with your eyes or heard truth with your ears in its pure sense? Never. You or beauty, right? You've never seen beauty. You've just seen beautiful things. So the philosopher is looking for the essence of truth, which is not something that the senses allow you to find. And in fact, when the senses are active, when we're hungry or in sensual turmoil in some way, our minds are less capable of functioning. So it actually deprives the mind from its natural ability to pursue what it needs. So the philosopher is always trying to overcome the senses, the flesh, right? The mortal flesh, and thus preparing in that sense. Death is the separation of the body from the soul, as he defines it.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a parallel to
Yeah.
be made with astronomy, where it is only when it's darkest that the stars shine brighter or shine brightest. And this darkness is maybe used as a metaphor because in a way you no longer see yourself. You no longer, like, your mind is almost in a, I guess your eyes are looking at the stars, but you can there's something there, I think, where you are no longer, as most people see life as what occurs in the daytime or what occurs in a lit room with, they can see the people, they can see everybody. But when you're all in the darkness and you're watching stars, actually the true astronomers are not actually looking at the stars. They're thinking about what is the physical principle that's generating the trajectory, or what is the reason for this action being this way and not another.
Mm.
Mhm.
There's definitely a poem in there, Luke. You have a poetic spirit.
Mhm.
See something blossoming. No, yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, because the astronomer's looking with their mind's eye. They're not just yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this,
he says that it's
yeah, Barrett?
less, the philosopher is not distracted by all of the physical pleasures,
Yeah.
but he's looking to reason to see the truth, the wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's also Socrates, his hypothesis really rests on the idea that there is your body and your soul. And then when your body dies, the soul is separated, but still lives. That's his key assumption. And that's the argument against that Aristotle and Epicurus and these other people had against Plato and Socrates, that they said when your body dies, your soul dies too. That's it. So this is what the argument is getting into right now, that CB's is asking Socrates, can you prove that when the body dies, the soul doesn't die?
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of part in the dialogue where Aristotle stops reading it. He doesn't want to know.
They were the first YOLOs.
What?
I just, from what Jerry said, I was just thinking, the YOLO.
You only live once.
You only live once. Yeah, they were. Aristotle was their first YOLO.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So that sets up the second paradox now. So we've established that the soul has these characteristics that are not of the body's characteristics, and that death is this characteristic of like the separation of the soul from the body. But now we have another problem of you never proved that that the soul doesn't perish with the body. You didn't prove that. You're about to die. And how do we know that your soul's not about to die with your body ultimately? So yeah, there's still that disturbance that has to be resolved. So now he's getting at the aspect of, well, it exists. It came from somewhere, didn't it? So he's getting at the reincarnation thing, I think.
But we already have the proof.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh yeah, there you are, Bob. Can hear you now.
Yeah, it was a conspiracy from a local energy provider, and it just happened. Right? And now I'm trying to get to see you. Right now, I'm not seeing. I did briefly. I don't know where this is. I get this launch meeting.
Okay.
Open Zoom. But, I know I should. It's gonna be tough.
Yeah. So, Bob, I guess the best to do is while you're figuring that out. We're still gonna be reading. We just took a moment to do a quick recap.
Yeah, still read. Yeah, go ahead.
Enjoy the.
I'll get back to you somehow.
All right. Good luck. All right. So where were we? Let's actually go back one. Let's go back to Socrates had finished on page 241 at the very bottom.
Oh, 241?
Yeah, when Socrates had finished, Cebes answered and said, Eureka?
Certainly. Are we going back further than that?
Yeah, page 241 at the very bottom, last paragraph. Socrates, I agree to the other things.
241, you said?
Oh, is that wrong? Did I go back too far? Where does he
when
begin
Socrates
talking
had
about?
finished?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
241
Okay.
at the bottom.
Oh, just
Okay,
by the way,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a point. Also, I remember Susan Kokinda made in her classes on Plato, and I was just looking at Philolaus. Philolaus was from Crotone, and he was a Pythagorean. And so Simmias and Cebes are from Thebes, and they are followers of Philolaus. He was their teacher, I think, basically.
Oh.
So he was so they are representing the Pythagorean philosophy school of thought in that dialogue that Plato is writing.
Oh,
So
very
you have
useful.
Socrates, how Socrates was seeing it, and you have the Pythagorean.
Wow, great. Very important. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So it's at the bottom of page 241, Eureka, where when Socrates, last paragraph, when Socrates had finished, Cebes answered and said, you see that, Eureka?
My pages are not numbering properly. Are we starting at let us consider?
No. Oh, geez. No, it's literally, you don't see page 241?
It's the number at the bottom of the page.
Okay, mine skips 2 pages. I don't know why.
Okay. Well, let's do this for the sake of the flow while you're finding it, Eureka. So, Jerry, why don't you read Cebes for now? And then Eureka will jump
Okay.
forward.
All right. Socrates, I agree to the other things you say, but in regard to the soul, men are very prone to disbelief. They fear that when the soul leaves the body, it no longer exists anywhere, and that on the day when the man dies, it is destroyed and perishes. And when it leaves the body and departs from it, straightway it flies away and is no longer anywhere, scattering like a breath or smoke. If it exists anywhere by itself as a unit, freed from these evils which you have enumerated just now, there would be good reason for the blessed hope, Socrates, that what you say is true. But perhaps no little argument and proof is required to show that when the soul is dead, the soul still exists and has any power and intelligence.
Socrates, that's Luke.
Sorry.
Sorry, guys, I think that's me.
Yeah, Bob, you can only have one on at the same time. It's going to cause disturbance if you have two devices on at the same time so close to each other for some reason. So you have to turn one off. Sorry.
What you say, CBs, is true. Now, what shall we do? Do you wish to keep on conversing about this to see whether it is probable or not?
I do. I should like to hear what you think about it.
Well, I do not believe anyone who heard us now, or even if he were a comic poet, would say that I'm chattering and talking about things which do not concern me. So if you like, let us examine the matter to the end. Let us consider it by asking whether the souls of men who have died are in the netherworld or not. There is an ancient tradition which we remember, that they go there from here and come back here again and are born from the dead. Now, if this is true, if the living are born again from the dead, our souls would exist there, would they not? For they could not be born again if they did not exist. And this would be a sufficient proof that they exist, if it should really be made evident that the living are born only from the dead. But if this is not so, then some other argument would be needed.
Certainly.
Now, if you wish to find this out easily, do not consider the question with regard to man only, but with regard to all animals and plants, and in short, to all things which may be said to have earth. Let us see with regard to all these whether it is true that they are all born or generated only from their opposites, in case they have opposites. As, for instance, the noble is the opposite of the disgraceful, the just of the unjust. And there are countless other similar pairs. Let us consider the question whether it is inevitable that everything which has an opposite be generated from its opposite, and from it only. For instance, when anything becomes greater, it must inevitably have been smaller and then have become greater.
Yes.
And if it becomes smaller, it must have been greater and then have become smaller.
That is true.
And the weaker is generated from the stronger, and the slower from the quicker.
Oh, sorry. Certainly.
And the worse from the better, and the more just from the more unjust.
Of course.
Then we have this fact sufficiently established that all things are generated in this way, opposites from opposites.
Certainly.
Now then, is there between all these pairs of opposites what may be called two kinds of generation? from one to the other and back again from the other to the first. Between a larger thing and a smaller thing, there is increment and diminution, and we call one increasing and the other decreasing, do we not?
Yes.
And similarly, analyzing and combining and cooling and heating and all opposites in the same way. Even if we do not in every case have the words to express it, yet in fact it is not always inevitable that there is a process of generation from each to the other.
Certainly.
Well then, if there anything that is there anything that is the opposite of living, as being awake in the opposite of sleeping?
Certainly.
What?
Being dead.
Oh, what? Oh, being dead. Then these two are generated from each other. And as they are two, so the processes between them are two. Is it not so?
Of course.
Now, I will tell about one of the two pairs of which I just spoke to you and its intermediate processes. And do you tell me about the other? I say one term is sleeping and the other is being awake. And being awake is generated from sleeping, and sleeping from being awake. And the processes of generation are, in the latter case, falling asleep, and in the former, waking up. Do you agree or not?
Certainly.
Now, do you? Tell me in this way about life and death. Do you not say that living is the opposite of being dead?
I do.
And that there are generated, they are generated one from the other?
Yes.
Now, what is it which is generated from the living?
The dead.
And what from the dead?
I can only say one thing: the living.
From the dead? Then, CBs, the living, both things and persons are generated?
Evidently.
Then our souls exist in the other world.
So it seems.
And of the two processes of generation between these two, the one is plain to be seen, for surely dying is plain to be seen, is it not?
Certainly.
Well then, what shall we do next? Shall we deny the opposite process? And shall nature be one-sided in this instance? Or must we grant that there is some process of generation the opposite of dying?
Certainly we must.
What is this process?
Coming to life again.
Then, if there be such a thing as coming to life again, this would be the process of generation from the dead to the living?
Certainly.
So by this method also we reach the conclusion that the living are generated from the dead just as much as the dead are from the living. And since this is the case, it seems to me to be a sufficient proof that the souls of the dead exist somewhere whence they come back to life.
I think, Socrates, that results necessarily from our previous admissions.
Now, here is another method, CBs, to prove, as it seems to me, that we were right in making those admissions. For if generation did not proceed from opposite to opposite and back again, going round, as it were, in a circle, but always went forward in a straight line without turning back or curving, then you know, in the end of, and all things would have the same form and be acted upon in the same way and stop being generated at all.
What do you mean?
It is not at all hard to understand what I mean. For example, if the process of falling asleep existed, but not the opposite process of waking from sleep, in the end, you know that would make the sleeping Endymion mere nonsense. He would be nowhere, for everything else would be in the same state as he, sound asleep. Or if all things were mixed together and never separated, the saying of Anaxagoras, all things are chaos, would soon come true. And in like manner, my dear Cebes, if all things that have life should die, and when they had died, the dead should remain in that condition, is it not inevitable that at last all things would be dead and nothing alive? For if the living were generated from any other things than from the dead, and the living were to die, is there any escape from the final result that all things would be swallowed up in death?
I see none, Socrates. What you say seems to be perfectly true.
I think, Cebes, it is absolutely so. And we are not deluded in making these admissions, but the return to life is an actual fact. And it is a fact that the living are generated from the dead and that the souls of the dead exist.
And besides, if it is true, Socrates, as you are fond of saying, that our learning is nothing else than recollection, then this would be an additional argument that we must necessarily have learned in some previous time what we now remember. But this is impossible if our soul did not exist somewhere before being born in this human form. And so by this argument also, it appears that the soul is immortal.
Oh, but Cebes, what were the proofs of this? Remind me, for I do not recollect very well just now.
Briefly, a very good proof is this. When people are questioned, if you put the questions well, they answer correctly of themselves about everything. And yet, if they had not within them some knowledge and right reason, they could not do this. And that this is so is shown most clearly if you take them to mathematical diagrams or anything of that sort. And if anyone has read the Meno dialogue, this is exactly the point of that one. Mm-hmm. And if you are not convinced in that way,
if you are not convinced in that way, see if you don't agree when you look at it in this way. You are incredulous, are you not? How that which is called learning can be recollection?
I am not incredulous, but I want just what we are talking about. But I want just what we are talking about, recollection. And from what Cebes undertook to say, I already begin to recollect and be convinced. Nevertheless, I should like to hear what you were going to say.
It was this. We agree, I suppose, that if anyone is to remember anything, he must know it at some previous time?
Certainly.
Then do we agree to this also, that when knowledge comes in such a way, it is recollection? What I mean is this. If a man, when he has heard or seen or in any other way perceived a thing, knows not only that thing, but also has a perception of some other thing, the knowledge of which is not the same, but different, are we not right in saying that he recollects the thing of which he has the perception?
Is this Cebes or is this Simmias?
I think it's Simeon.
Simmias.
Okay. What do you mean?
Let me give you an example. Knowledge of a man is different from knowledge of a liar.
Of course.
Well, you know that a lover, when he sees a lyre or a cloak or anything else which his beloved is wont to use, perceives the lyre and in his mind receives an image of the boy to whom the lyre belongs. Do you not? But this is recollection, just as when one sees Simmias, one often remembers Cebes, and I could cite countless such examples.
To be sure, you could.
Now, is that sort of thing a kind of recollection, especially when it takes place with regard to things which have already been forgotten through time and inattention?
Certainly not.
No, certainly.
Oh, sorry.
Well, then,
Certainly. Yes, certainly.
well, then, can a person on seeing a picture of a horse or a lyre be reminded of a man? Or on seeing a picture of Simmias be reminded of Cebes?
Surely.
And on seeing a picture of Simmias, he can be reminded of Simmias himself?
Yes.
All these examples show, then, that recollection is caused by like things and also by unlike things, do they not?
Yes.
And when one has a recollection of anything caused by like things, will he not also inevitably consider whether this recollection offers a perfect likeness of the thing recollected or not?
Inevitably.
Now, see, if this is true, we say there is such a thing as equality. I do not mean one piece of wood equal to another, or one stone to another, or anything of that sort, but something beyond that. Equality in the abstract. Shall we say there is such a thing or not?
We shall say that there is, most decidedly.
And do we know what it is?
Certainly.
Whence did we derive the knowledge of it? Is it not from the things we were just speaking of? Did we not, by seeing equal pieces of wood or stones or other things, derive from them a knowledge of abstract equality, which is another thing? Or do you not think it is another thing? Look at the matter in this way. Do not equal stones and pieces of wood, though they remain the same, sometimes appear to us equal in one respect and unequal in another?
Hey, Eureka, do you want to pick up as Cebes?
Okay. Okay, where are we?
Oh, 250, page 259. Do you see it? Where he says certainly.
Is that where we are? Like where I say certainly?
Yeah, like Cebes says certainly. Right under the top paragraph.
Just before well then, right?
Yep.
Certainly.
Well, then, did absolute equals ever appear to you unequal or equality inequality?
No, Socrates, never.
Then those equals are not the same as equality in the abstract.
Not at all, I should say, Socrates.
But from those equals, which are not the same as abstract equality, you have nevertheless conceived and acquired knowledge of it.
Very true.
And it is either like them or unlike them.
Certainly.
It makes no difference. Whenever the sight of one thing brings you a perception of another, whether they be like or unlike, that must necessarily be recollection.
Surely.
Now then, do the equal pieces of wood and the equal things of which we were speaking just now affect us in this way? Do they seem to us to be equal as abstract equality is equal? Or do they somehow fall short of being like abstract equality?
They fall very far short of it.
Do we agree then that when anyone on seeing a thing thinks this thing that I see aims at being like some other thing that exists but falls short and is unable to be like that thing but is inferior to it, he who thinks thus must of necessity have previous knowledge of the thing which he says the other resembles but falls short of, right?
We must.
Well then, is this just what happened to us with regard to the equal things and equality in the abstract?
It certainly is.
Then we must have had knowledge of equality before the time when we first saw equal things and thought, all these things are aiming to be like equality, but fall short.
That is true.
And we agree also that we have not gained knowledge of it, and that it is impossible to gain this knowledge except by sight or touch or some other of the senses. I consider that all the senses are alike.
Yes, Socrates. They are all alike for the purposes of our arguments.
Then it is through the senses that we must learn that all sensible objects strive after absolute equality and fall short of it. Is that our view?
Yes.
Then before we begin to see or hear or use the other senses, we must somewhere have gained a knowledge of abstract or absolute equality if we were to compare with it the equals which we perceive by the senses and see that all such things yearn to be like abstract equality, but fall short of it.
That follows necessarily from what we have said before, Socrates.
And we saw and heard and had the other senses as soon as we were born.
Certainly.
But we say we must have acquired a knowledge of equality before we had these senses.
Yes.
Then it appears that we must have acquired it before we were born.
It does.
Now, if we had
People
acquired,
generally get the idea of like why he is saying that there must be this like this difference between equality in the abstract and equality that we can sense with our senses. That's clear for everyone, right?
Can you just explain a little bit more into detail?
Yeah, sure. Like these are two cups, right? Can you see these two cups?
Yes.
Yeah. So is this cup more or less? So is this black cup more or less equal to this white cup? compared to this book, which one is more equal?
Well, it's white. Kidding.
Sabotaged. It's a simple question. So yeah, which is more simple? The book
Oh,
or
it's
the
black
white?
on the other
Sounds like Sesame Street there, Matt.
Yeah, there's profound stuff in Sesame Street. Too.
Some of these things are equal.
Exactly. Now there's a profound idea in there because it's obvious the two cups are more alike than the book. But what is it within us that allows us to judge one as being more versus less equal? Is an inner standard that of equality. Now, perfect equality, you could always find two cups. Like I could even have two black Bruce Lee cups, which look super identical, but they're not equal, right? They're made of different material. They're occupying different space and time. So as close as equality can seem to come in the sensory domain, and if my eyes were closed, petting my two cats, they might seem like the same cat. They're not. So my senses can be fooled, but I have an internal standard of equality, which is pure, like the idea of like two equal squares, right? Two equal cats exist in the ideal domain beyond the senses. And for that must exist for me to judge what is more or less equal than other things. Otherwise, I couldn't navigate through the world of my senses. I would be useless. I'd be bumping into things and making bad judgments all the time. So yeah, that's just the two states of reality that he's getting at in his proof, because he's generating a certain hypothesis and testing it out in terms of the idea of, what was it, recollection, and how is it that we come to know what we know through being asked questions instead of being told an answer. And he gives the example of the slave boy who is led to make a discovery and recognizes that the discovery is the answer to the problem without having been given the answer to the question. So that this proof hinges on it.
I would add that, there's this idea also when Jerry mentioned the Meno dialogue. That's a very, very important one to look at. But Plato talks about the ideas, or sometimes some translators they put the forms, but it's really like the idea or the concept of things. And so people, when you're showing your two cups, Matt, so you might have an idea of what is a cup. And these two examples, they fit your knowledge, your understanding of what is a cup and what is its purpose. And so it might not be the cup that you have in your mind as the standard, as the gold standard of what of cup, what cup is, but it is similar. And so you try to define things, let's say, from that standpoint of what is your understanding of what is it, the original cup.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think in the arts, there's a good example from Michelangelo where he described when he was asked, like, how do you make these wonderful sculptures out of marble? And he got at how he has a vision of what the ideal image looks like in his mind that he brings out of the marble. So he already sees it inside of the marble stone and is sort of liberating it from the stone, but it exists in his mind. And yeah. So there's this relationship between the mind's ideal and like the physical world that we're interacting with, that have a reciprocal back and forth. Because like what's organizing each step of the process of his carving the marble, right? Each step of the way, it's being organized by that transcendental idea in the future. And it may not look exactly like that idea because he's still working with the physical world, but it's becoming closer and closer to it. I think that's getting at what Socrates is saying here, how the physical world is always yearning for that higher ideal world, which is what we've been alluding to in the last two pages.
So that's what Leibniz's monads, more or less the same.
It touches on that, Bob. It touches on that. Yeah, it's related, very much so. Good observation, Bob. Cool. All right. Anything else? Any other thoughts? All right.
Well, it just brings to mind something that happens in when there's an injustice in the world, even if most people do not have the abilities to discuss it or whatever, or don't say anything, they are still able to witness or evaluate. Like they can still be impacted by this injustice. They can feel it internally. Mm-hmm. Because they have this ability, and we all have this ability. And so just because the injustice is not, like a superhero doesn't come in and stop the injustice, but we are all affected by it. No matter where we are, basically, as soon as we learn about it, we have this means inside of ourselves to measure the inequality, or to
an innate sense of what is right is getting it right. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I like that. And that touches on equality too, because equality and justice are related concepts, right? Equality has a certain symmetry, balance, right? A certain beauty and symmetry, and the scales of justice as well have a certain idea of equality as well, that one side should balance, for fairness, for that to work.
But we
see it out of balance means we must have a positive sense of justice in order to judge where it is absent, and thus feel that ugliness, that tension inside of us, that something's wrong, that has to be changed.
But the scale is ourselves. Like, it's not like we see a scale tipping left or right. It is internal to us, that it's we've always had it.
Yeah.
Before the senses.
Yeah. I like that.
Because then it appears that we must have acquired it before we were born. Is that where we stopped last time?
I think that was. Yeah.
Yes. There's a bad joke about that all children are born geniuses, and we teach them how to be stupid.
You will at some point have to say the joke.
No, you did.
You did? What was it? I couldn't hear it.
Oh, you didn't hear it?
No, do it again.
All children are born geniuses, and then we teach them how to be stupid. Right? That they have this knowledge in their head to be a genius. Mm-hmm. It's there from the time they were born.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Well, you guys are doing great on that reading, because when I came in, I just thought it was part of your commentary, and one of you was Socrates. My God.
Luke, you're doing a masterful job.
Yeah.
There is no Luke. There is only Socrates.
Well, how did you get him to come on?
Okay. All right. So where did we leave off?
At the top of 263?
I think that was about right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, and we saw and heard in other senses as soon as we were born? Let's just start there.
Now, if we had acquired that knowledge before we were born, and were born with it, we knew before we were born, and at the moment of a birth, not only the equal and the greater and the less, but all such abstractions? For our present argument is no more concerned with the equal than with absolute beauty and the absolute good and the just and the holy, and in short, with all those things which we stamp with the seal of absolute in our dialectic process of questions and answers, so that we must necessarily have acquired knowledge of all these before our birth.
That is true.
And if after acquiring it, we have not in each case forgotten it, we must always be born knowing these things and must know them throughout our life. For to know is to have acquired knowledge and to have retained it without losing it. And the loss of knowledge is just what we mean when we speak of forgetting. Is it not, Simmias?
Is that me?
No, yeah, that was you, Simius, right?
Who's Simmias?
Eureka.
I think it's you, Matt.
It's me? Oh, I thought I gave you Simius. Okay, sorry. All right, certainly,
She's-
Socrates.
She's Simmias. But I suppose if we acquired knowledge before we were born and lost it at birth, but afterwards, by use of our senses, regained the knowledge which we had previously possessed, would not the process which we call learning really be recovering knowledge which is our own? And should we be right in calling this recollection?
Assuredly.
For we found that it is possible, on perceiving a thing by the sight or the hearing or any other sense, to call to mind from that perception another thing which had been forgotten, which was associated with the thing perceived, whether like it or unlike it, so that, as I said, one of the two things is true. Either we were all born knowing these things and know them all our lives, or afterwards, those are said to learn merely remember, and learning would then be recollection.
That is certainly true, Socrates.
Which then do you choose, Simmias? Were we born with the knowledge, or do we recollect afterwards things of which we had acquired knowledge before our birth?
I cannot choose at the moment, Socrates.
How about this question? You can choose, and you have some opinion about it. When a man knows, can he give an account of what he knows or not?
Certainly he can, Socrates.
And do you think that everybody can give an account of the matters about which we have just been talking?
I wish they might, but on the contrary, I feel that tomorrow at this time there will be no longer any man living who is able to do so properly.
Then, Simmias, you do not think all men know these things?
By no means.
Then they recollect the things they once learned?
Necessarily.
When did our souls acquire the knowledge of them? Surely not after we were born as human beings.
No, certainly not.
Then previously.
Yes.
Then, Simmias, the souls existed previously, before they were in human form, apart from bodies, and they had intelligence.
Unless, Socrates, we acquire these ideas at the moment of birth. For that time still remains.
Very well, my friend. But at what other time do we lose them? For we are surely not born with them, as we just now agreed. Do we lose them at the moment when we receive them, or have you some other time to suggest?
None whatever, Socrates. I did not notice that I was talking nonsense.
Then, Simmias, is this the state of the case if, as we are always saying, the beautiful exists and the good and every essence of that kind, and if we refer all our sensations to these, which we find existed previously and are now ours, and compare our sensations with these, is it not a necessary inference that just as these abstractions exist, so our souls existed before we were born? And if these abstractions do not exist, our argument is of no force? Is this the case? And is it equally certain that provided these things exist, our souls also existed before we were born, and that if these do not exist, neither did our souls?
Socrates, it seems to me that there is absolutely the same certainty. And our argument comes to the excellent conclusion that our soul existed before we were born, and that the essence of what you speak likewise exists. For there is nothing so clear to me as this, that all such things, the beautiful, the good, and all the others which you were speaking just now, have a most real existence. And I think the proof is sufficient.
But how about Cebes? For Cebes must be convinced too.
Oh, Eureka, you're on mute.
But I think it's still you, Matt.
Oh, I thought it was. Oh, okay, yeah. He is fully convinced, I think. And yet, he is the most obstinately incredulous of mortals. Still, I believe he is quite convinced of this, that our soul existed before we were born. However, that it will still exist after we die does not seem even to me to have been proved, Socrates. But the common fear which Cebes mentioned just now, that when a man dies, the soul dispersed, and is the end of his existence, still remains. For assuming that the soul comes into being and is brought together from some source or other and exists before it enters into a human body, what prevents it after it has entered into and left that body from coming to an end and being destroyed in itself? Now it's Cebes.
You are right, Simius. It seems to me that we have proved only half of what is required, namely that our soul existed before birth. But we must also show that it exists after we are dead, as well as before our birth, if the proof is to be perfect.
Just quick, you guys
It has
all,
been
you guys are
shown.
all comfortable with the proof of the soul existing before we were born, right? Based on recollection and essences?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on it?
Yeah. Did you ever remember a few weeks ago? I asked people to see if they can double the area of a square while keeping it a square. Did you ever work on that, Eureka? You did? You didn't. Okay. It would help if you did.
No, I missed the last class, so I forgot about it. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. Put that back in your mind. recollect that thought, that problem, and it'll help to go to just think about the problem of, again, you have a square and you want to double the area of the square, but you want to keep it a square using your first square. Let's say, and think about what you do. It would help if we were actually sitting down. Maybe we could do a call tomorrow or the day after or something, and we could go through it individually. But a good teacher would be able to get the student to discover the answer without telling the student the answer. The thing is, and that applies for anything. There should be nothing that is teachable which couldn't be taught by asking questions instead of just telling the kid to get the right answer because here's the answer, okay? Everything should be able to be taught that way. But we don't have a lot of access to that in our society because we live in a messed up world where that part of the mind is not appreciated very much, or it's actually, as we've all come to discover, targeted for handicapping. So, but Socrates is saying questions like, not only because we talked about there are square things, like tiles behind you are rectangular, but you put two rectangles together, you get a square. They're square things, but they're not perfect squares. The idea of a perfect square exists in the mind. So that's a transcendental idea. It's just like justice. So teaching people about beauty and justice and things of that higher order can be done by asking questions. But if you're remembering, because by asking questions, it's like, it means that it's already there and you're recollecting what the answer is. You're not being told it, it's not being put into you, right? But if you're recollecting, if it's already there, where did it come from? The answer. Was it there when you were a minute after you were born? All of the answers to all possible questions, how were they all inside of the soul of the student, right? When did they get there was the question. So what we were getting at is that it must have some existence before the birth of the body. There must be the soul containing all answers within itself, even before the physical body exists. But that still doesn't answer the question, well, what about when the body dies? You didn't prove that the soul doesn't also disperse and perish like dust,
Okay.
Yeah.
It has been shown, Simmias and Cebes already, if you will combine this conclusion with the one we reached before, that every living being is born from the dead, for if the soul exists before birth, and when it comes into life and is born, cannot be born from anything else than death, and a state of death, must it not also exist after dying, since it must be born again? So the proof you call for has already been given. However, I think you and Simmias would like to carry on this discussion still further. You have the childish fear that when the soul goes out from the body, the wind will really blow it away and scatter it, especially if a man happens to die in a high wind and not in calm weather.
Assume that we have that fear, Socrates, and try to convince us. Or rather, do not assume that we are afraid, but perhaps there is a child within us who has such fears. Let us try to persuade him not to fear death as if it were a hobgoblin.
You must sing charms to him every day until you charm away his fear.
Is this me?
I think so.
Socrates.
I think you're supposed to say, where then?
Yeah. Where then, Socrates, shall we find?
Where then, Socrates? Shall we find a good singer of such charms, since you are leaving us?
Hellas, Thebes, is a large country in which there are many good men, and there are many foreign peoples also. You ought to search through all of them in quest of such a charmer, sparing neither money nor toil, for there is no greater need for which you could spend your money. And you must seek among yourselves too, for perhaps you would hardly find others better able to do this than you.
That shall be done. But let us return to the point where we left off, if you are willing.
Oh, I am willing, of course.
Good.
Well then,
Well,
must we not ask ourselves some such question as this? What kind of thing naturally suffers dispersion, and for what kind of thing might we naturally fear it? And again, what kind of thing is not liable to it? And after this, we must Must we not inquire to which class the soul belongs and base our hopes or fears for our souls upon the answers to these questions?
You are quite right.
Hey,
Now,
guys, I'm just noticing that it's 10:13, and I do have to do a few things. But this is, I think, a good spot to maybe end for tonight, because we're now setting up the groundwork for a serious next big hypothesis in our pursuit of whether the soul exists, and if it does is it immortal, or is it also finite? So this is like an intermediary stage here of the argument. Are you guys okay with that, or does it grieve you all to stop here?
That's good.
No, that's a good place to stop right there.
Awesome. Okay. All right, great. Jerry, thank you so much for opening this up and finding this translation. I'm really enjoying this.
I think it's
did Jerry do that in Greek?
Yes,
In
Jerry.
ancient Greek? I see you got the context. I missed that part.
Next week, we're going to read the same dialogue, but in Greek, Bob. So
I'm working on it now.
that's your homework.
Cool.
Okay, guys.
All right, y'all. Have a great night, and I guess I'll see people on Sunday for Pascal's class on. Well, Pascal, what's your class going to be on?
What's the class going to be on?
It's going to be on the Westphalian presidents.
The Westphalian precedent. Okay, great.
Okay.
Precedence or president?
Right, we'll see you then.
Presidents.
Aha. Cool.
Oh, the president, not the president.
All of them, or the 20th century ones?
20th century ones.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Sunday.
Okay. All right.
that piqued my curiosity.
Has to be Kennedy, right? Yeah.
Oh.
Right.
He's not going to tell you. What a showman. Okay. Bye, guys.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Guys.
Okay.